Buddy, the simple handicap for Tuesday, October 22nd. Thank you for making me a part of your morning. Growing up, my mom had a book that she would read to us, and it was Alexander and the No Good, Terrible, Very Bad, Horrible Day. Book came to mind over Sunday and Mondays. It was a no good, very bad, terrible, horrible week, number 7 for myself and the Right Angle Sports team. The service goes over, and there was just nothing good happening at all in week 7. So it was the first real bad clunker of the entire season, but we move on to week number 8, which hopefully brings a lot more optimism with it, with a full slate of games, no teams on the bye, and let's get to it and set you up for your market rundown here on this Tuesday morning to get you on your way. Things kick off on Thursday Night Football with the Minnesota Vikings on the road at the LA Rams. The Vikings still a 3-point favorite across the board with a total in this game of 48. The total is up from 46 at open, and the point spread has been locked in at 3 at every sports book that matters since the open on Sunday night. I do wish there was a chance that we would have got a bigger number than 3 to take with the home dog in this spot. Would love to find the way in to back the Rams. It doesn't look like that is going to come to fruition in some of our early number runs yesterday. We got to the Vikings around 4. Wasn't numbers that we had, but others that we were sourcing based on in-season numbers and metrics. So there's potentially here an indication that we might see this number tick up a little bit. But I was really hoping for the contrasting results, and you maybe saw like a 4.5. I know it was wishful thinking, but if the Rams slipped up against the Raiders, you have the Vikings hang on. But in reality, we got conflicting results the other way, and I think some of the cracks in Minnesota started to show. Cooper Kupp will be back for the LA Rams as he was a full participant in the version of practice that the Rams held yesterday. So it could be a spot where the Rams play up to their potential, but at the current number, it doesn't look like there's going to be an opinion on neither the side nor total in this game for us and myself coming up this weekend. As we jump over to Sunday, it is the Tennessee Titans on the road at the Detroit Lions. Detroit got as high as 12.5 yesterday, and it was late in the game for Arizona, LA, where we saw the 12.5 taken out and returned to 11 at Chris. We're seeing 10 at Circa, 11 at Buckeye. An odd split between a number of books on this game. This is the first favorite that we have seen of this number get bet up. I think that's really a reflection of what is going on in Tennessee. It was another odd round of press conferences for the skill players in Tennessee for a second week in a row. It does seem like the team is starting to fall apart a little bit. We don't have indication if Will Levis is going to be back starting yet. Mason Rudolph did very little to impress in that game against Buffalo. And so waiting to see what happens with that news. There's always the trade news rumors swirling around the Titans. We saw the trades last week move a number of point and a half. We'll see if the Tennessee Titans end up continuing to shop some of those receivers around. As it is for now, even Detroit coming off of the big win in the division, going back home in this game against a tougher run defense, the Lions are getting the early money so far this week. Total from 45, holding steady at 45.5. Baltimore, Cleveland still off of the board. Baltimore off a dominating win of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, more than 500 yards of total offense. And there were 9.5-point favorites on the look ahead. We'll see how that opens. I would only expect with Cleveland struggling last week, this number to get a little bit higher, even with what looks like Jameis Winston starting for the Cleveland Browns, as Dorian Thompson-Robinson has the finger injury, which is not deemed serious, but it seems like based on the wording and how this is being covered as an injury, it's a rather quick turnaround to expect him to be back on the field, despite that being the quarterback, oddly enough, that it seems like the Browns want to play based on how they handled the promotion last Sunday before the game against the Cincinnati Bengals. Green Bay on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. Green Bay money consistently coming into the market. This was 3.5 initially at open, got to 4.5, and now we're seeing 5 minus 0.5 this morning at Chris. 4.5 everywhere else across the board. Early money all in on Green Bay so far. Guessing that the Packers are going to be a very popular side this week, and it's been over money one way on the total. We're now up to 49.5, shaded towards even 50 at Chris this morning. There is some weather in the forecast for a number of games. 10 to 15 mile per hour winds in Cleveland, Miami, New England, Tampa Bay, Jacksonville, Seattle, and San Francisco. Nothing substantial to where it's going to have an impact. Potentially rain in Seattle which could messy things up a little bit. But this game, very fringe weather, doesn't seem like it's going to be too much of an impact, if anything at all. So it's been clear to fly here on the total so far from bettors in the first 24 hours of this market being open. Indianapolis on the road at the Houston Texans. We're seeing Houston as a soft 6-point favorite at Chris Circa and Buckeye. We see 5.5 showing at FanDuel. There was a release yesterday when this got up to Houston minus 6.5 from a pro that took out the 6.5s in favor of the Colts. He released the Colts. This came down. That's now why it is a soft 6 and a strong 5.5 and a couple of sports books. Concern about the Houston Texans offense, I would believe, from his perspective. Also potentially concerns just based on this matchup like we talked about on the Sunday live stream. Nico Collins has been the guy against zone coverage for Stroud. And in this matchup specifically against Indy the last 2 years, you take him out, that's all of a sudden looking like a big blow to the offense, which is really struggling right now for Houston. So you can understand why there was potentially sentiment seen there to back Indianapolis and potentially why we're coming down. Arizona on the road at the Miami Dolphins, not fully available yet. Likely looking at Miami around a 3-point favorite with the return of Tua in this game. Was at pressers yesterday speaking like he typically does. All signs indicate that he is going to be out there. The market certainly reflects that with this game moving across to 3, potentially higher. We'll see what this market settles at later this morning. The total is also up higher at 48 on the early markets that we are seeing. Might be a little bit rich on the side. We'll see. I wish something I'm going to have circled on the off-season project list as we get into March, April, May, June, and July. It really appears, and I haven't seen any concrete data on this, but the first game back for quarterbacks out of injuries do seem like they're just historic underperforms. And I wonder if that's going to draw some Arizona money in this matchup, given the injury sensitivity around Tua and what that might do to this offense. All the pieces are there otherwise, and you would expect in this matchup against this Cardinals defense, as aggressive as they were last night, as much as they were flying around, they looked great. But if you do have a drop-off in QB play, and we're obviously seeing a bit of a premium put on the Dolphins, numbers that we have internally would have made this on the short side of 3. I just wonder if that first week back spot is potentially going to draw money here early week for Arizona. Atlanta on the road at Tampa Bay, a rematch of the two teams playing on Thursday Night Football a couple weeks ago in early October. The second round of these divisional matchups always tend to be skewed under historically. It's a spot, especially when they're played this quickly. The quicker that they are played closer to each other rather than being stretched out, that's typically when you see these games skew a little bit under. I'm looking at a very high total in this game, 48.5. Wonder if we're going to see under money come in the market in a kind of a traditional spot between these two teams, but certainly plenty of concern for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, which continues to struggle. Chicago on the road at Washington, not nearly fully available as Jaden Daniels gets hit with the week-to-week status. Week-to-week is never a great indication. It doesn't have a long history of getting that designation and playing in the game coming up, unless you're Michael Pittman for the Colts. Otherwise, it just rarely happens. And so this seems like, as we talk here very early on a Tuesday morning without a lot of information, that given that designation, this is probably a Marcus Mariota start for Washington. Chicago coming in off of the bye after the big win in London. They have certainly benefited from the ease of schedule, but you would think in this matchup they get another favorable schedule against this Commanders defense, and I think that quarterback change is going to look a lot different in this game than what Marcus Mariota looked like against a lifeless Panthers defense on the other side in relief on Sunday. New York Jets on the road at the New England Patriots. We talked about this on Sunday as the look-ahead line was around 38.5, and my comment was there is no way that this game can open less than what it closed at in the first meeting, which was 40. We got to be higher than that, and that's certainly where we are looking this morning. 42s across the board with the Jets installed as a 7-point favorite left to right across the screen. No movement whatsoever on the side that we have seen so far in the market. Buffalo on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. Bills 3-point favorites on the look ahead. They're out to 3, minus 120 this morning. Not a significant move in any regard, but it is a little bit intriguing to see Buffalo perhaps not get the credit for how dominant that second half was in the scoreline, where Seattle was kind of, I would say, looked a little bit better based on the boxes we discussed yesterday. And there's also the chance that we see them without DK Metcalf in this game. If he is ruled out, I would certainly think there's going to be a bump in this line. Now, the indication is that it is not as serious as it was initially reported once the injury happened. And so there is concerns that he misses some time. I've looked at a couple different injury pages, read a few articles, a wide range of outcomes. Some guys reference his toughness and say that he is going to try give it a go this week. Others are indicating 1 to 2 weeks missed. It's a very wide range of outcomes and predictions at the moment. We'll get better news on that today and into tomorrow for a better indication. The total in this game, it has not moved either. 47.5 down to 47. As I mentioned, 10 to 15 mile per hour winds, and the chance of rain in this game is the highest of any games right now on the week at 60% chance of rain, but that's normal for Seattle this time of year. New Orleans on the road at the LA Chargers. No number on this game yet. Indications were that it was going to be Chargers north of 7. Total was going to be short of 40. Derek Carr seems 50-50 at best to return in this game. I think that's optimistic based on the injury designation that he received. The bigger question to me is, will it be Rattler or Haener? And what is the status going to be of Chris Olave, which we probably won't get a better indication of until Wednesday when he is back and practicing. So there's question marks for the Saints in this game. A ton of injuries, especially on the offensive side. The defense struggling to stop the run. A bad matchup here against the Chargers and what they want to do on offense. But as this number creeps up and gets a lot bigger, if the Saints do make a QB change, if Olave is back, I'm curious to see how high is too high in this market, because I would struggle to find a lot of cases here if it is Haener, Olave is back, and you get some other guys healthier for the Saints, to how you can justify the Chargers being this big of a favorite. But this is absolutely hinging on the injury information we're waiting to see. Philadelphia on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals. There were some cheap 2.5s available yesterday. It even got as low as -2 earlier in the morning. That was a strong disagreement in the market as those were taken out. We're now 2.5 -10 at Circa, 3 -05 at Chris, 3 even money at Buckeye, and 2.5 -20 everywhere else across the board. Total from 49.5 down to 48 at Circa, 47.5 shaded over at Chris. A lot of variance with the Philadelphia Eagles and what you make of their offense. I've heard compelling cases so far in the last 24 hours about how they're not changed from what they were a year ago, and they're benefiting from the opponents that they have faced. And I'm looking at some of these box scores and the score lines, and they're certainly getting in favorable spots the last couple weeks against Cleveland, last week against the Giants, where they were able to keep the ball on the ground, and they had some big splash plays in the pass game. Weren't really pressed, weren't really challenged offensively. If the Cincinnati Bengals offense, which has struggled the last 2 weeks, returns to what it was earlier in the season, that's going to push Philly on offense. And then what do things look like? Is this still going to be the offense of the Eagles we saw last year? Is Kellen Moore going to get opportunities to change? We don't know, because the last couple of weeks for Philly, we really haven't got a glimpse of what they're going to look like if they're behind and if they are pushed. Kansas City on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Chiefs, a 10-point favorite across the board. Total from 43.5 down to 41. So fun back and forth in this game. Was looking at initially the Raiders, as I talked about on the Sunday live stream. I said this is a big number. The Chiefs are void of skill position players. We know Smith-Schuster is not going to play in this game. All of a sudden, they're pretty thin on offense. And the Raiders, amid all of their problems, still get up and play hard early in games every single week. You have Brock Bowers on a historic trajectory for a rookie. Receiving numbers, potentially positives here looking at the Raiders. And very first thing yesterday morning, there was a release from a pro that was sent out took out the majority of the full 10s on the board with the Raiders, which is why we're at a softer 10 or 9.5 here this morning, and was going through our conference call internally. We were going over games, talking sides and totals, and something that came up, it just kind of sparked me. I didn't think about it on the Sunday show. If you remember back to the offseason and in training camp, the Raiders had the Kermit the Frog thing at their training camp, poking fun at Mahomes, and it was something that came up in the pressers. Mahomes said, we'll handle it when we get there in the season. There's also the thought of the Christmas Day game, in which the Raiders had to win and did the fuller extent of the celebration in Arrowhead and everything that came with that victory and how it sparked the Chiefs' change. There's kind of a lot riding on this for the Chiefs and Mahomes specifically that was just enough to kind of sit there as a point and be like, yeah, do you want to get in against this right now? Because the way that he is playing, and even as we see in the Niners game when he's struggling, the Chiefs, in spite of all of these offensive injuries and issues they have, still putting up points. The defense is still playing exceptionally well up front. As frisky as Minshew might be as a bigger dog, there's some potentially bigger things at play here behind the scenes for the Chiefs, which wouldn't make this game a look-over or a pass-over like there could have been indication it might be coming off of that win in the Super Bowl rematch last week and going from a short underdog to a much different role, laying double digits on the road. Carolina on the road at the Denver Broncos. Denver out to an 8.5-point favorite. And folks that listen to the podcast and like to follow in on bets, like to follow in on things that I do, you'll be happy to know that I have been restrained from betting on the Carolina Panthers side for now. Arguments were shut down internally. Instead, we acted on the total and played the over, and the justification was if all of the positive arguments that I was coming up with for the Panthers side on offense were valid, and the Denver Broncos were able to avoid a game where things are going to be solely on the shoulders of Bo Nix, although there is sentiment internally that he is improving and getting better each week, and this becomes a Broncos run game where they can dominate the ground against this Panthers defense, and we see Carolina forced into a bit of a chase mode, which in this spot I think works out well. If all of that was to come true, it's a better over than it is a side, and that is why we acted on that. Sent out a number that's at least 2 points better than anything on the market currently. Dallas on the road at the San Francisco 49ers, Sunday Night Football. I'm blown away by the injury situation that's occurring in San Francisco. It's hard to imagine things getting any worse, and I mean, it is just continuing to pile up with injuries. So Kyle Shanahan came out and had a press conference yesterday and just ran down a summary. And so all of a sudden for Deebo Samuel, what was an illness and in general was being, he was being poked at and made fun at for not being tougher and toughing it out. Deebo Samuel is in the hospital with pneumonia. And there was an injury reporter that I read through that suspects that this might be a couple weeks of injury because there is going to be damage to his lungs if there is fluid in his lungs. That sounds dire. George Kittle has a sprained foot. Brandon Ayuk is lost for the season. Ricky Pearsall in his first game back did not take on much of a role. Jordan Mason still has the sprained AC joint, and we're waiting to see what we're going to get for a status of Jawan Jennings, who has the hip injury. Shanahan sounded optimistic about his chances, but the fact is that we don't know what we're getting. On the other side for the Dallas Cowboys, there's all of the defensive injuries to watch up front, but because they had the bye, we don't get the traditional reporting cycle yet, so we'll know more about them a little bit later in the week. But there's just a massive collection of injuries on both sides of the football. With all of the issues going on with San Francisco on offense, we're seeing this number come in. We're as low as 4.5 at BetOnline, Pinnacle, FanDuel, and DK, soft fives at Chris and Circa, total from 50.5, down as low as 46.5 this morning at Circa. So it has been dog money and under money consistently coming in amid all of these injuries piling up now for the San Francisco 49ers. And then it is Monday Night Football with the New York Giants on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Daniel Jones gets the vote of confidence from Brian Daboll that he will remain the starting quarterback after the switch in the fourth quarter. Daniel Jones was not happy about the change. There are rumors coming out that this could be kind of a dividing point, whether it sparks him back for better performance this week or goes the other way and things start to unravel, it's something to read into and find out a little bit more about. In this matchup, the Pittsburgh Steelers go from a team that has been priced at short numbers all season, a few times installed as a short underdog. Now all of a sudden they're at home laying more than 6 points. This got as high as 7. The 7s did not last. There was another release from a group that took out some 7s and 6.5s. With only 6.5 showing on the board this morning is at Chris, 6s everywhere else across the board. It is a big number for the Pittsburgh Steelers to be laying relative to prices we typically see them priced at. The total is down a full 3 points from 39 down to 36. That will do it for me this morning. Have a fantastic Tuesday, everybody. Enjoy your day, and I will chat with you bright and early back here tomorrow on the podcast feed.